All right, 9:03 it is. And so we'll get started so that I can get the initial stuff out of the way and save more time for us to go through the more interesting aspects of our meeting. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to September Land Use Coordinating Committee meeting. We are back after a brief hiatus. I'm Sam Shinbaga, Managing Director of ARC's Community Development Group, and I am looking forward to the discussion today. I think the topic today.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress. I'm sorry.
And we're set. So I think that the topic today goes, in my opinion, to the very heart of our profession. And that by that I mean planning, be it local, urban, rural, regional, community planning, whichever way we define the planning realm we operate in. I'll say it's fair to say that most people that come into the planning profession come with the intent of helping communities be better by tackling one or more physical issues, and that can range again from be it housing to downtown redevelopment, arts and culture, historic preservation, climate change, food access, name it, air pollution, something we do a lot, and just to name a few. But it is something that it comes from a place of passion. And now we all mean well, and we are often trying our best to do the right thing when it comes to being inclusive and thorough in our community engagement efforts. However, at least from my personal experience, both as a consultant in my previous life and then as a public sector planner, I can say that we can't help but often boil down our success in community engagement to either a set of numbers or a set of tools. And simply saying, the answer we often ask is, did we get a good number of participants? And also if we used a bunch of different tools to do community engagement. And if the answer is usually yes to one or both, we declare victory. And now I'm here to tell you that as the Atlanta Regional Commission, and me personally as the head of the community development group that oversees all aspects of our local and regional community development efforts, this, I'm sort of challenging ourselves and you all to think about this very notion of how we define good community engagement. By simplifying engagement to a bunch of numbers and tools, it is my belief that we're missing out on more substantial answers and questions. And so the questions I believe we need to ask is, did we engage and hear from the people who this issue truly impacts? And more importantly, not just at moments of time, but in a systematic and comprehensive way. And therefore, are we creating solutions for the people who are most impacted by that issue? Now, that work, as we all know, is much harder and it takes more time. But if you and I go back to, again, the why we all became planners, I think the answer is very easy. We must center our community engagement efforts on the community members who are most impacted. And I mean center, not include. Often the people are unable to show up, the people are overseen. And to be clear, and so this is the distinction that I want to draw and hopefully hear from the panelists and the folks today, is this is not just about having those community members be part of the planning process, but this is about who gets to define the problem, who is telling you what are the community concerns that need to be addressed. And so it is as much about co-designing and co-creating the actual problem statement as it is about participation in the process itself. Now, over the course of the next few months, like I said, we're getting ready for our next call for CDAP and LCI projects, and we will be asking you to answer these questions as you develop your project ideas. Today, however, we wanted to start that conversation, and we wanted to show you a few different ways in which we are centering community-based organizations and local advocates in our planning efforts. You will hear from Sarah Brown on how the Atlanta Regional Commission and the Foodwell Alliance worked with the community to both co-create the problem statement, but also work together to find solutions in the planning process. Sarah Brown is currently the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Foodwell Alliance. She leads their engagement efforts with local governments throughout Metro Atlanta, and she worked closely with our planning staff on the creation and adoption of the Southeast region's first ever city agriculture plan in the city of East Point. You will later hear from some of the folks that were intimately involved in the creation of that plan. And also you'll hear from Marion Liu, who is the force behind ARC rethinking this idea of why and how we do community engagement that is most impactful. Marion also leads the agency's arts and culture work, and she's going to talk to you after we hear about the City Ag Plan. Now, we will wrap up as usual. You may recall to hear from Kelsey, who is with our Natural Resources Group, with another edition of information on critical climate resources for our local governments, and she's going to talk about one such element. Now, before we begin, as always, I did want to turn it over to Molly to just give you some housekeeping tips and make some announcements. Molly?
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to remind you all of how to participate on Zoom. As you know, we have transitioned to the webinar platform, so it's a little bit different from our meeting platform. We have a Q&A function, so any of your questions, please put those in that Q&A function. For any of your comments, ideas, thoughts, go ahead and throw that in the chat function. And then during the panel discussion, if we have time, we'll ask you to raise your hand and we'll call on you and I'll unmute you if you'd like to speak. If you have any technical difficulties, as always, start by just logging off and logging back on. I know it's simplistic, but it seems to be the best way to fix any issues. And if you continue to have any issues, go ahead and throw a chat to me. If you can't do that, though, I'm going to go ahead and put my email address in the chat. So if you can't use the chat function on Zoom, you can email me as well. Just a few announcements for you all, and as always, I'll include these in your follow-up email. The 2022 Tip Project Solicitation will open on October 1st. We'll have a link for additional information as well as an email address for any questions that you might have. In addition, the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank will be accepting grant and loan applications starting October 1st. Again, we'll have a link for additional information as well as an email address for any questions that you might have. And before we jump over to Sarah's presentation, I'm going to actually ask you, as usual, to let us know where you're coming from. So we'd like to kind of hear from you, public, private, nonprofit, or education. Go ahead and respond now. Looks like primarily public at 82%. And private and nonprofit kind of equal at about 10%. All right. Share those results for you. All right. So Sarah was not able to be with us this morning, but she graciously agreed to record her presentation for you all. So that's what I'm going to play now. Go ahead and throw any thoughts that you have into the chat and any questions that you have into the Q&A function. We'll forward those to her after the fact and then get you responses as soon as we can.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today to discuss city agriculture planning and how this process centered community-based organizations. We're really excited to see folks interested in learning more about this unique process, especially as we look to expand to new cities. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Foodwell Alliance. I've been with Foodwell since 2018 and helped to steward the pilot city agriculture plan process in East Point. And I'm sorry I couldn't join you live today, but I'm grateful to ARC for facilitating this recorded presentation, and I'll be available for any follow-up questions via email. So just to get us all on the same page before we dive in, what is a city agriculture plan? Like other city plans, the city agriculture plan is a set of short-term, long-term, and ongoing recommendations that provide a roadmap for a community to achieve its vision of creating a vibrant and sustainable community food system over the next 5 to 10 years. A city agriculture plan will look different for each city, as the plan's recommendations are rooted in stated community priorities, and it works to leverage current community resources. The city ag plan process intentionally incorporates a community engagement piece to ensure that residents and local food leaders really drive the process, and that they can identify ways that local food can be integrated into their city's existing plans and programs. So why is this important? And why take the time to plan around this issue specifically? There are a myriad of reasons why supporting local food systems through a formal city ag plan is beneficial. It helps to cultivate the physical and mental health of residents. It also helps promote the vitality of cities, building a sense of pride and belonging in communities, increasing home values and walkable community activities, and committing to sustainable practices. It can also support resiliency and equity in communities as well by increasing local food access, creating space to grow culturally appropriate food varieties that can celebrate diversity, and increasing opportunities for local entrepreneurship. So how was this concept initially developed? In 2017, Foodwell Alliance produced a local food baseline report that outlined some of the evolving challenges and opportunities for urban ag in the Metro Atlanta region. And one of the main takeaways from that report was that a major barrier to success of local food and ag organizations was a lack of local policies and programs that supported their growth. And more specifically, the need for a seat at the table when those policies and programs were developed. So to that end, Foodwell convened a design table that was meant to really conceptualize a roadmap for engaging local governments around food and ag issues, and that ultimately became the City Agriculture Plan program. And as we were thinking ahead to piloting this program, we knew that in order to be most effective, we'd really want to partner with expert organizations. So for the community asset mapping part, we contracted with Taproot, a consulting firm that cultivates sustainable and equitable community development. And of course, we partnered with the Atlanta Regional Commission for the planning phase. So the Southeast region's first ever city ag plan was recently developed in East Point, Georgia. And after our first call for applications in 2018, East Point was chosen from the 7 applicant cities due to a couple of factors. They had a really high level of community enthusiasm. They had dedicated city staff that were eager to help kind of steward the municipal process. And they already had a breadth of local food and ag organizations that could leverage plan resources. So first, Foodwell started off with a 4-month community engagement process. And after that, ARC led the steering committee through a 7-month planning process. And we worked together to secure plan approval from first the East Point Planning and Zoning Committee and then City Council. And ultimately, the plan was incorporated into the community goals section of the city's comprehensive plan. And council also approved the formation of a local food system commission that would guide plan implementation and make sure this was a priority for the city in perpetuity beyond Foodwell's involvement. And also just wanted to note that, while this specific process is kind of new to our region, around the country, local food leaders, gardeners, and farmers have been working on the ground and advocating to include food access and urban ag into their local policy. So really, this is part of a growing movement around formalizing protections and support for urban agriculture. So this plan, like plans for other issue areas within the city's comprehensive plan, like transportation or housing, is a set of recommendations for the city to pursue. And how progress is made towards those recommendations is ultimately going to be up to the city's newly formed Local Food System Commission. And the 5 main priorities here each contain, as I mentioned, short-term, long-term, and ongoing strategic suggestions within the plan, and they're all meant to contribute to sustainable and diversified local food options for East Point residents and a strengthened community food system. So our 5 main issue areas within the plan were improving local food access, supporting local urban growers, establishing the role of local government, cultivating environmentally resilient practices, and finally branding East Point as a local food destination. So one new element that Foodwell Alliance brought to ARC's kind of traditional planning process was this extensive community engagement phase prior to developing the plan. And the addition of this component was really important to us for several reasons. You know, we wanted to ensure that all the recommendations of the plan were rooted in what the community wanted and would efficiently build off of the numerous community assets we already knew existed in East Point. So Foodwell Alliance led several events to help engage East Point residents in this process and get them thinking about the food and ag work happening in their community. So in August of 2019, we held a kickoff event for over 100 residents. We broke them out into small working groups for discussion and identification of community assets. You'll see the photo of folks mapping things out on the map. Then in October, we led a 6-stop bus tour, which is the other photo here. And we brought folks out to the farms and food organizations in East Point to get to hear directly from their local food leaders. Then in November, we received applications from residents that were interested in serving on the plan steering committee, and we hosted a kind of pitch night where 3 members of the committee were actually directly elected by community members. And throughout all of those events, throughout the fall of 2019, Taproot Consulting was also conducting a community asset mapping project to identify what residents felt were the physical and the social community assets already in East Point that could serve as a framework for this plan. So in total, Taproot spoke to over 300 people through focus groups in each city ward, individual interviews, and tabling at other events. And they then produced a final community asset mapping report with all of that data, which served as the basis for the planning process. And really core to our goal of centering community in this process was the makeup and diversity of the planning steering committee. So in addition to the 3 community elected delegates, the mayor selected 1 committee member, and the council members from each ward selected another 4 committee members. Foodwell Alliance had actually provided a list of local food leaders and residents that were interested in participating to the mayor and council, and almost all of their appointees were chosen from that list. 4 city staff members were also appointed to serve, and they represented the economic development and planning and zoning departments. So as it worked out, East Point community-based organizations that were represented on the steering committee included Soul Spirit Farms, Market 166, which is a grocery co-op in formation, Strange & Co. Farm and Nursery, the East Point Farmers Market, and Common Market Southeast, a regional food aggregation and distribution group. So we learned a lot through this process. It was our pilot program, but some of our main takeaways are listed here. The approach for each community needs to be tailored and individualized. This is not a one-size-fits-all planning process. Building a plan around existing community assets and with extensive community input means taking time to get to know what's going on in that city, who's leading the work, and whose voices still need to be heard. The process can be longer and more complicated, but the results will be more impactful. So appointing folks that have limited experience with planning or even working within local government processes definitely adds a layer of education and some time to the process, but it ensures that community leaders are driving those planning conversations, and it can act as a professional development opportunity. So third, relationship building and raising issue awareness throughout the planning process is as important as the plan's content. Even before any of the plan's recommendations are implemented, the relationships that are formed or strengthened between community leaders and their local government officials make this process worth it. In East Point, we've seen the mayor and council members get involved in home gardening and starting new community gardens. We've been able to incorporate local food and ag into existing city initiatives that are focused on health and wellness. And we know that growers in East Point now have a more direct connection with their city leadership, and they can reach out on their own to solve issues and collaborate. We also found that working with community-based organizations opens communication within their established networks of community members. So for local governments that are looking for effective ways to reach community members around specific issue areas, working with local organizations opens up communication with their built-in networks. And these cross-marketing opportunities can really represent some new and fresh ways to engage with the community. And finally, rooting recommendations in stated community needs builds in a kind of implementation plan. So when the plan is finalized, knowing that all that community feedback is already incorporated, leaders can begin to implement recommendations, knowing that those projects are what their constituents truly want. So to learn more about city agriculture planning, I would encourage anyone interested to visit the Food Alliance website. And there you can find more info on the East Point community engagement and planning processes, as well as their final approved plan. And as a little plug, in addition, we're also currently seeking applicant cities who are interested in developing a city agriculture plan of their own. And our application window is open through October 15th, and all of that information can also be found on our website. So if anyone has any follow-up questions or comments regarding the East Point process or a potential applicant city, please feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to discuss. And thanks again for having me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.
All right. Well, I did want to mention that that was a very quick overview of the project itself. But if you need more information, there is we threw a link. Jared threw a link to the plan itself in the chat. Please take some time to go through it. There is obviously, I will mention one more thing, which we'll get into the panel in a little bit, just because of the way we did this plan and the recommendations that came out of it. It has been quite the success, not just in terms of adopting the plan itself, but in terms of the implementation, which I'll let the city talk about in a little bit. But we've had some pretty successful beginning to implementation activities for the plan itself. So a lot of good things there. Now I will transition over and turn it to Marian, who is who's going to talk about some of the intersection of this work with the arts and culture work that she's leading. Marian.
Thanks, Sam. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marian Liu, and I'm here to share with you a preview of a workshop that we're hosting in 2 weeks with around 10 community-based organizations that are led by or serving communities that have been most negatively impacted economically by and during COVID, which we all know that just means that COVID exacerbated existing and growing disparities and inequities. So next slide, please. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Community Engagement and Arts Program Manager here in the Community Development Group. And a little bit more about me and why I'm in this role and why I'm talking to you about this work is my background is that 7 years ago, I founded a community-based organization that really focused on community development through engagement and creative placemaking or placekeeping through the artistic and cultural heritage and traditions and practices of community members, most of whom are immigrants or refugees. And so some of this work was actually included in a 2017 Livable Centers Initiative study. And this picture here is from a mural that was part of a collaboration with the public art nonprofit Living Walls that created 10 public art installations after community engagement with 10 community groups, working with 10 artists, artists of color who are also immigrants and refugees, some of whom were from the community that we were working in. And I share this because it leads me to next slide. It leads me to what we're trying to do in our team, which is specifically to create more inclusive and equitable community engagement that really centers, and Sam mentioned this, and also in the previous presentation, that really centers the communities that we've excluded and marginalized in our planning efforts, specifically the communities of color that constitute nearly all of our region's growth. And to do this through our arts and culture and creative placemaking efforts, which are really to advocate for artists, support our region's diverse cultural practices and traditions, and incorporate arts and culture into our everyday work, and to connect and communicate with communities in creative and meaningful ways. So next slide. So in 2 weeks, we'll be hosting our first community-based planning through arts and culture workshop. And the background of this and the design of this workshop is really, the first step was to identify these community-based organizations that are in these communities, serving these communities, part of the communities that are most negatively impacted by COVID. The second part of this, and I'll talk about each of these as we go through the presentation. The second part is partnering with an artist who themselves has a civic and social practice to share their work that they've done and to facilitate and ask them to help us facilitate this arts and culture-based community design. And thirdly, to partner with these community-based organizations to co-design projects that really center their lived experience and their knowledge to improve outcomes in their own community. Next slide. So the first part of this is how did we identify these community-based organizations? So we're inviting more than 10, but we're hoping to have around 8 to 10 CBOs that we work with in our workshop. And so next slide, I wanted to acknowledge and thank my colleague, Ryan Schlom, who's on this call. So if you have any questions about this process, ask Ryan. But he really helped us by mapping indicators with American Community Survey data that show the census tracts with a high population of affected groups, groups that were affected by COVID, to identify geographic areas throughout the region with a high concentration of groups that were affected. And so these indicators, and this is not obviously causation, it's just an indicator of negative impacts of COVID. And so these indicators were, some of these were race and ethnicity based, so Black, not Hispanic, and then Hispanic or Latinx, and foreign-born populations. And then median household income, the poverty rate, unemployment rate, renter occupancy, and then high cost burden with these populations, and as well as households with broadband access and households with personal computers. Well, households without broadband access, and households without personal computers. So next slide, please. So by mapping this data, we came up with this map, and you can see several clusters here, the Cobb County area south of Marietta, the greater Clarkston area, the I-20 corridor between DeKalb County and Rockdale County, the Beaufort Highway corridor, and the area southwest of the Southern Crescent. Next slide. And so here in the second map, or in the first map, you can see sort of the areas that these indicators really highlighted that these areas were the areas that have been most impacted by COVID. And then the final map is we mapped the organizations that we invited. And I also wanted to thank my colleague, Josh Phillipson, for pulling up community groups and organizations that are located in and serving these clusters. So you'll see one that's in downtown Atlanta, but that's just where their office is. And next slide. So some of the participating organizations in the workshop, and this is not the full list. I'm just showing 6 for now. It's the Aleph Institute, which fosters the understanding and appreciation of Arab culture to connect humanity through the power of arts and culture. Bal Ethnic, which is based in East Point, which creates access for dancers from overlooked and marginalized backgrounds. The Center for Pan-Asian Community Services, which serves the Asian Pacific Islander Health. It serves the Asian and Pacific Islander communities, and they're a health and human services agency. And then next slide. The Global Village Project, which is based in Clarkston, which offers education specifically for refugee girls. The Latino Community Fund of Georgia, which supports Latinx, serving nonprofits and individuals with advocacy, technical assistance, and collective investment. And the Southview Cemetery Association, which is a historic African-American founded cemetery. It's where Dr. King and Congressman John Lewis are buried. So we'll be working with these organizations and a few more in this workshop to ask them really to lead the conversation in identifying, sharing about the issues and challenges and opportunities in their communities that their community members are seeing, and to work with the artist. Next slide, please. So here are some of the key workshop elements. Again, up to 10 community-based organizations. We're inviting them to send 2 to 3 representatives from each organization. We're offering $250 in compensation for each organization. And I think this is an important element to acknowledge that, their job is not to participate in our workshop. Their job is really to serve the needs of their community members. So this stipend is really to acknowledge their time and their knowledge that they're sharing with us and coming to be with us. So we hope that 3 project ideas from this cohort will be included in ALMA 2022. I think I've talked about ALMA in previous LUCC presentations, but ALMA is our arts leadership program. And earlier this year, we included a group project component. So we had 3 group projects in which groups from ALMA, groups of planners, artists, as well as local officials were working together to develop ideas and solutions for 3 of these community planning projects. And we're hoping this year that the projects can be more rooted in actual challenges that communities are facing. So the goal, one of the goals of this workshop is to identify and develop 3 community planning projects that then can be included in ALMA, and really to lay the foundation for an ongoing, as Sam mentioned earlier, to lay this foundation for an ongoing partnership between our group, the Community Development Group, and regional CBOs in 2022 and beyond. Next slide. So the second part of this is working with an artist with a civic and social practice to share their work and facilitate community design through arts and culture. Next slide. And you may be familiar with Charmaine Minifield. She is the artist that we'll be working with in this workshop. And her work really centers, it's focused on preserving Black narratives as a radical act of social justice. And you may have seen her work throughout the region, and she's done work beyond this region, but in here, in Atlanta and around Atlanta. You may have seen her work on Auburn Avenue and Hateville, and most recently in Oakland Cemetery. Next slide. This is the praise house that she installed, that was installed in Oakland Cemetery, and it will actually be, be installed in locations throughout the region. The project is called Remembrance is Resistance, and it's really, she's using public art as an act of resistance against erasure. And a little bit more about Charmaine is that her work draws from Indigenous traditions throughout Africa and the African diaspora, to explore African and African American history, memory, and ritual, again, as an intentional act against erasure. And so her work is really community-based, and we felt that she would be a perfect person to invite to share her own experience doing this kind of work with the community-based organizations that we've invited to the workshop. Next slide. And so the workshop is structured in this way, is about developing. First, we'd like to develop a shared understanding around the values that we're bringing to this work, that our team specifically is bringing to this work. We'd like to ask for a response from the group. What is their response to what we're sharing about ourselves? And we're really trying to create an atmosphere of transparency and accountability for ourselves and how we show up in community and with community, which is a pretty different approach from just, as Sam mentioned, just including, we're trying to go beyond inclusion and work toward and create an atmosphere of mutuality and trust. And so the workshop will also include, as led by Charmaine, community visioning through storytelling. What's the story, how you imagine your community in the future, and discussing the arts initiative that she's leading, that is, changing the social landscape, that is intended to change the social landscape, particularly around, right now, her project is in the Southview Cemetery area. And then cohort-based learning, because we're bringing a very diverse group of people from throughout the region together, very different community needs, very different, ways of working, different practices, different cultural traditions. But we're hoping to foster this atmosphere of cohort-based learning. And then finally concluding with the community groups sharing back their project ideas to one another. Next slide. And the final goal, which, obviously we have not concluded yet, we're just starting this, is partnering with the community-based organizations to co-design projects that center their lived experience and knowledge. Next slide. And so we have some desired outcomes for CBOs, or desired takeaways from this workshop. Reimagining their own role and learning about new opportunities for them in the community planning process, particularly as it relates to our work and what we're trying to achieve. Acquiring examples and ideas for working with artists in the planning process, and to begin developing one clear idea for addressing a specific community challenge or opportunity. And it's not to say, I did want to make clear, because this has come up in our communications with these groups, is this is not to say that they're not already doing this. Many of the CBOs have already been involved in the planning process, are already working with artists, have supported and developed artists from their own community. So it's not that, they're not already doing this work. Many of them already are. It's just, how do we as the ARC, how do we in the community development group begin to support this more intentionally and begin to think about changing our process and changing our policies to be a better partner for the work that these community organizations are already doing in many cases. Next slide. which brings me to the desired takeaways from this for us, which is to begin building relationships of transparency and accountability with community-based organizations, to learn by doing and iterating, and sometimes having to ask for forgiveness and patience on how to collaborate and co-design with and in community, and to amplify and support and effectively partner with community-based organizations and amplifying their voices as they're leading the planning process. Next slide. So thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Marian. I had a question for everyone, but I did wanted to see if folks had any questions around anything that Marian just went over. And I'll, if you wanted to throw that in the chat, please feel free to do that. If you wanted to ask it, and we can go ahead and unmute you. You got to raise your hand. But at this point, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And while that is coming, I did want to ask the audience, because as we saw, there's the 80+% of folks on this call are local governments. And obviously a lot of what we're saying is about how we build better relationships with our community-based organizations and local governments. So I'm curious if our local government representatives here, when we keep talking about CBOs and community-based organizations, and if there are any community-based organizations that you're currently working with or have ongoing relationships with as you go about doing the planning activities in your jurisdiction. I guess that goes to show we got some work ahead of us. So, so again, I think this is, again, like I said, an area of work that we are committed to working with you all on, and ourselves, like learn ourselves, how do we do this better? And just to give you an example, I'll just throw this out there. When we were talking about community engagement, we kept going back to, hey, we got to do some more focus groups, and we got to get these community-based organizations to show up and participate. And very quickly we realized, you know what, these are often very small 1 or 2 person organizations which just don't have the time or the ability to participate. And rather than sort of scratching our heads to why they're not showing up, despite us asking them multiple times, when Marian and Tatiana and Josh, we did individual follow-ups with some of these folks and artists, it comes down to you do need to respect their time. And one small way to show that is by compensating them for the time that they're putting in. And that's where we went back and thought about how, if we're asking them to take time out and come and sit down at the table and provide their expertise, honestly, that's what it is. We're trying to really hear from their perspective. They're the only ones who can provide that perspective. How do we make it in a way that we respect that? And so we made this very small $250 contribution for these organizations to attend this meeting. Again, a very small thing. I know it seems like it, but it goes a long way when you're looking to do more engagement from these organizations that are embedded in the community, and several more lessons that we're continuing to learn. All right, well, I will now turn it over. Now we're gonna get into seeing how some of the things that Marian talked about and some of the things that Sarah talked about played out in the city of East Point, which did their first City Act plan. And at this point, I'm going to ask our panelists to, if it's possible, to turn their cameras on so we can see who's in the room. So that is, we got I believe we got Maceo at this point. We got Tony. I see Tony there. Hey, Tony. Hey, Maceo. And I believe we got Chelsea. And she's trying
My
to
camera
come.
doesn't work.
That's fine, Chelsea. We can hear you. So thanks for being here. And I believe Kimberly was going to be joining us, and I don't see her now, but if Kimberly, you're here, please, if you're able
She's
to.
not. She wasn't able to make it today, so I'm gonna speak in her stead.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Tony. So we're just gonna make up what Kimberly would have said. That's easy. No, so, but again, between Maceo, Tony, and Kimberly, I think they were very intimately involved. All three of them. Just goes to show the commitment that the city of East Point had in this work. So thanks for being here. Chelsea, thanks for being here. I'll just make, I know folks probably know Maceo and Tony pretty well. I will just quickly introduce them. Maceo Rogers is the director for the Department of Economic Development at the city of East Point, and he oversees business recruitment and job creation. He's responsible for executing economic development strategies that grow the city's tax base and enhance the quality of living. Anthony Tony Alston is the chief planner of the Planning and Community Development Department at the city of East Point. He is primarily responsible for everyday zoning responsibilities, such as drafting staff reports and presentations for the Planning and Zoning Commission and Mayor and City Council for zoning cases that include, your rezonings, use permits, and variances, reviewing plans, and enforcing the zoning ordinance for the city. And then we have Chelsea Townsend, who has been involved in the good food movement and urban agriculture for 20 plus years. She's been actively engaged with the community since moving to East Point 11 years ago in various volunteer and professional roles. She has a small nursery specializing in edible plants and nano farm at her home on 1/5 of an acre in Jefferson Park. So again, we got a great group here, and I'm just going to get started right off the bat. There's no formal presentation here. We're just going to be asking some questions, hopefully get a discussion going. And then as we go along, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we can have Molly sort of tee it up to be asked from the group. But I was hoping that we could start it off by asking just a couple of basic things, right? So let me start with Maceo and Chelsea on this one. So Maceo, the City Ag Plan, the first in the Southeast. Why, I guess, is the very simple question. Why did the city want to do a City Ag Plan? And I think Sarah mentioned this, there was a lot of excitement in the community around it. So can you give us a little bit of background on how that came about?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sam, and good morning. Thanks for having me. Yes, so the city was extremely excited and enthusiastic about this plan. East Point had been touted as a food desert, for example. So we knew that there was a great opportunity here to enhance the well-being of our citizens by engaging in a project that would provide healthy options throughout the city. And so having this opportunity would make a huge difference, I should say, in terms of us moving forward with this plan. From an economic development vantage point, of course, it meant an opportunity for me as the director to provide a linkage between processors, distributors, producers, vendors, retailers, and the community to bring them together so that they realize for the greater good of everyone involved, the opportunities that were before us. So having city government now connect with the community at large would give us a greater opportunity to realize our vision for the urban ag plan.
I just wanted to say that, hello, thank you for having me. I have been fighting for food access urban agriculture for a long time. And it was really exciting to see that our city was ready for this to happen. When Foodwell came to us and we had this opportunity going to these meetings, seeing all the excitement, I think the time has just finally come. And the excitement of having our city so involved in this and our city so supportive of this has just been an incredible experience for me as a grower, and I know for other farmers as well. So this is just kind of, we're finally seeing all of our hard work coming together with this group of people.
Thanks, Chelsea. So I'll go back a little bit to what Sarah was talking about right at the beginning, that we had this process to even get to the beginning of the planning process. And there was extensive engagement. And as part of that, we had a steering committee, which consisted of folks who are in the community and are local food advocates. And, I wanted to sort of explore a little bit, both again, Maceo, Tony, and Chelsea, from your standpoint, when you entered that steering committee, what were your expectations of what the planning process would look like? And I say that just from the experience of, we have a certain notion of what a steering committee and a planning process functions like. And wanted to hear a little bit about what you were going in expecting and what you faced when you got in.
Very good. Well, I'll go first here. So again, going back to the very beginning, we convened the community meetings in the fall of 2019. We were able to garner a lot of input from the community at large. That enthusiasm was very, very infectious across the board. And so hearing the various perspectives and ideas from various individuals and relative to their backgrounds made a huge difference in terms of, from where I sat, the kind of anticipated now core initiatives of the process, because now I'm having to look not just at a brick and mortar kind of perspective or objective in terms of business recruitment, retention, and creating jobs, growing the tax base. But now, what if we had farmers who were involved with not just growing, but trying to get their produce out to various vendors, and connecting the dots, so to speak, was one of those things that you had to really kind of recalibrate, step back, and think about. So the anticipation and what I expected to hear from the steering committee, particularly when we got involved, was how do we go about leveraging that so that those who were in that particular sector with respect to urban ag, what are those benefits? What could they get out beyond where they presently were? And so this created not only a healthy challenge, but a very a great balance in terms of creating opportunities and leveraging our resources that we had to work within. I think you're muted, Sam. Okay.
I was. Thanks, Matthew.
Sure.
Chelsea, did you want to, again, this was, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but probably one of the first typical long range sort of city planning processes that you were sitting on a steering committee for. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's definitely fair to say. This was, what did I envision the process to look like? To be honest, I had no idea. I had no clue what we were coming into. There was a lot of excitement, but also trepidation. I went in as an empty slate. Again, I've been working for this for a long time without any response. So I had a little bit of a reservation there. So when I walked in there and I saw this group of people and this combination of people I knew as growers, people I knew as producers, as well as these city folks who, you know, that's incredible. It's incredible to have that kind of direct access and to understand that our city is wanting to be a part of this. So I went from having no expectations to being really quite enthused about the whole process.
And so, I mean, if I may follow up on that a little bit, Chelsea, because again, if this was the first time you were interacting, let's say, with a planning process, right? Were there, did you think you got in and you had enough information in terms of what that process looked like or what it was set up to achieve at the end of the day? Or is that something you had to sort of gather as you went along the way?
To be honest, I had to kind of gather it. I truly wasn't I didn't have any knowledge of what I was walking into, just some hope.
Okay. Tony?
I'm kind of like Chelsea with that. I kind of, went in with a blank slate. What I was really happy about was that we had people that were from the government, from the farming and growing community, as well as some citizens, people that attend in our farmers market here with the city. And I'm from New York, so, and I grew up in Maryland, and I have always, my personal interest as a food planner is in food access and reducing urban food miles. I actually did my graduate thesis on food insecurity within Baltimore City and built a garden for one of the neighborhoods out there. So I was really excited. I was like, man, they have a food access plan. This is the first one for the region. That is very historical, and I don't know if everybody realized how big that was, how much of a monumental statement that was for the city. I don't know if people really understood the magnitude of what was happening at that moment, the history that was actually being made. What I was surprised about is that we did get a bit of resistance from Planning Commission. At that time, they were really, some people were against it being, they thought that it was they thought it was taking a step back as it pertains to the history of minorities. We will hear things like, this is not future forward. This is, take a step back. Why are we doing crops and harvest? We should be focusing on technology. And I was just really surprised at that. I was very surprised at the statements that were being made and the resistance that we were facing once we were getting through that process. But from the city's perspective, from the planning department perspective, our goal was to push this through and to get this adopted. So I'm pretty happy that that's where we ended up.
Tony, it feels like we've tapped into some kind of like alien communication behind you. We're getting a lot of feedback on your end, but
hold on.
I think Tony might try to dial back. There we go. There you are.
Is this better?
Oh, way better.
Okay.
Way better.
But
I was just
really
what they were trying to say.
We were just really surprised about the resistance and that we were getting from, like I said, a lot of the planning commission, some of the planning commission staff, as well as the public, about that they didn't feel like this was a future forward thing, that this was taking a step back. They couldn't understand why we were focusing on harvesting crops versus technology. And I've lived in a lot of different places. Like I said, I'm originally from New York, and we have community gardens all over the place. So I was just really surprised, and I guess maybe with the history of the South and the history, given the demographics of the city, that maybe that's the concern that they had. But from a planning perspective, we understood the importance of having food access. As someone that is interested in reducing food insecure areas and reducing food miles, I was just praying that this was going to go through, that council was going to adopt it. And I'm so glad that this committee, the steering committee, was so diligent and so patient and so dedicated to making sure that this went through. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to see that this has taken place. I'm excited about the history that all of us have been a part of. And I'm just looking forward to seeing how Food Well Alliance and ARC continue to do these great things.
Thanks, Tony. So I'll pose a question which is around like general timelines that we operate in planning, in long range planning, in economic development. I think we're typically looking at a future which is a little further away. Like I think even in the presentation we said the City Act plan is looking 5 to 10 years out, and it is to sort of make that vision happen over the course of that time. And now there's a subset of the folks that are coming into that process with that expectation of the timeline. However, when you're working with community-based organizations, or in the case of the City Act plan, we had folks who were trying to address immediate issues. They were trying to bring concerns which were impacting their ability to grow or not grow in the here and now. Can you, Chelsea, maybe talk, or whoever wants to talk a little bit about what that looked like, what those conversations look like to a certain degree in terms of, we're trying to look out further, 5 to 10 years from now, but at the same time, we have all these immediate issues that we'd also like to be thinking about and addressing within this plan.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, Chelsea, there's, I think, when you're bringing to the community-based organizations and the community advocates that were part of this process, we're looking to find solutions in the here and now, right? Like one of the things I'll bring it up as an example was I think we talked about like, okay, we're trying to do this City Act plan, but what does this mean for changing how we charge for water for folks who are trying to grow in the community, and what does that rates look like, because they're unable to grow because of that. So there's some very short-term priorities that are being brought to the table while we're also trying to envision for 5 to 10 years into the future. Just trying to understand like how some of those conversations played out and how some of the priorities that you brought to the table and some of the priorities that the city was bringing to the table, just trying to get a sense of what that conversation looked like.
Well, essentially, those of us who are growers, we're ready for some of these changes to happen right now. And people who are consumers or on the other end, they want to see something happening right now. So that would be probably something that I would have liked to see more of, is a couple of low-hanging fruit projects we could have put out there to show the community and the growers and farmers and everybody else that this is something that's happening and this is why it's happening. Sometimes we would get very, very excited about all the possibilities. And that would kind of take over conversation for a little while, this excitement over what could be happening. But all, the only thing, like I said, I would have liked to see a little bit of low-hanging fruit, things like dealing with the water issue that you just mentioned, or livestock certifications, or things like that, land access to city land, that probably would have been fairly easy to take care of, actually be pursued during the process. I think we kind of missed an opportunity there. But overall, I think it was understood that this is a long-term process. This is a visionary process. This is something that we're going to be working on for many years to come. And I think that was also, honestly, I think that was exciting. It showed that the city was investing in us.
And by investing, we did end up investing in this past the adoption of the plan. So Maceo, did you want to talk about, we did the plan, but what's happening with it next?
Very good. Yes, so we have a plan in place. And really our next most immediate step that we want to accomplish is getting the Urban Ag Commission approved by our city council. This particular commission will help steer policy, guidelines, and implementation strategies from this point moving forward, as it has to do with really Tony's area, planning and community development, because they deal with all the zoning and land use issues that we would be encountering moving forward. But, when you think about the fact that throughout the metro area, East Point, just like many other communities, are growing. We've grew by about 3,000 plus since I think about 2012 up to through 2018. That means that land use now becomes even tighter and more restricted because we have a greater population. So what that also forces us to look at is how then we incorporate community gardens with school gardens, with green roof gardens and backyard gardens in terms of now growing produce from all of those areas based on the fact that we are part of a metropolitan area and we don't have room to expand geographically. So we have to look at how then we can be more strategically aligned with growing our own fresh produce so that everybody has access to it in a way that perhaps they don't right now. So with that said, that commission will be extremely important. And of course, we do have it on our agenda for the October 11th work session.
And Maceo, the city also was a recipient of a USDA grant, I believe, which is going to be a significant boost to
yes, incredible. Yes,
implementing.
Yes, that's true, and we're extremely excited about that. $250,000 additional dollars to be utilized. Now, what this afforded us was the fact that we could hire now an urban ag manager who will now be staffed to work closely with the community, the commission board that I just alluded to, obviously the city itself, again, bringing city government with community so that a lot of these things we've talked about in the plan and gotten approved this far will now be able to get implemented as we move forward. This is a critical step because, again, going back to something that Chelsea alluded to, when you talk about benefits that would come in terms of water rates, electrical rates, again, zoning and permit fees that would be also attached to cost of doing this sort of thing. It makes a huge difference when you know or can anticipate what you can expect if you were going to really go more aggressively at this than perhaps what you are right now. So what that meant is that, well, that's a whole new dynamic, one that we didn't have time to include with just putting the plan together, but it would be a great component for the commission board to now focus on as part of their job. I mean, if we had, like, say, another year or so, we could have certainly gotten into that. And we did talk about it, but we realized that that was just a huge piece of the puzzle all unto itself. And so we needed to get the plan approved in a efficient amount of time as much as possible and move forward from that point.
And the beauty of it, Maceo, is that the person that became the project manager was someone who was from the steering committee. Absolutely.
Mr. Tanisio Sinima, who is the owner and operator of Nature's Candy Farm. And we are extremely excited about him being on board with us with Foodwell Alliance. He brings a wealth of knowledge. He knows his stuff in and out, has a number of years of experience in this particular industry. So he is a breath of fresh air, really, when it comes down to us now, again, taking this needle and advancing it another step forward in the direction that we want to go.
Thanks, Maceo. And so I have one last question for one from the city's perspective and then from Chelsea's perspective. So I'll start, maybe this one I'll start off with Tony and then have Maceo, you go first. Is from the city's perspective, what did this process teach you guys in terms of what are ways in which you can take some of these lessons and apply them to your next long range planning process or next, let's say, even an LCI study? Are there things that were done in the creation of this plan that can transfer over to other planning processes?
Yes. You want me to go first or Tony? Yes, I'll go. Yes, thanks, Sam. The my takeaway from this process is very simple. Come with an open mind. You're going to get a lot of ideas, a lot of input, a lot of perspectives from those involved with varying backgrounds. And each person is going to bring that perspective to this arena. And if you're not open to what you're hearing and what they're saying, because you're focused on what you bring or what your ideas are, then you're going to miss out on a whole lot. So open-mindedness, engagement, because no one gets it done by themselves. So by making this a communicative or community collaborative that involves a myriad of backgrounds from various public sectors, private sectors, made a tremendous difference. It gave us, instead of a one-dimensional approach, more so a 3D approach. And that really helped because, again, I was able to walk away with perspectives now that obviously were different from the one-on-ones that I took just based on what I focused on each and every day that I come to work, which is recruiting businesses, retaining businesses, creating jobs, growing the tax base. Well, now we have this whole new dynamic that we have to deal with. And how do you deal with that? Well, you got to be open because you don't have all the answers. And if you have that approach and you take that approach, then I think you should be okay.
I just wanted to echo what Maceo has said. I completely agree. I think that, like I said before, I think that one of the coolest things about this was that you had people from the city, you had people from the public, you had people who were out there who actually are farmers and growers. And like you said, having that open mind, I think that it was great that the mayor and council were so supportive of this. I noticed that at the kickoff meeting. And I think it's great that the elected officials were as involved as they were. From a zoning and even the architectural perspective, my perspective is obviously going to be much different than economic development, which is going to be much different than those who are out there every day, literally, grassroots and in the dirt. But it's great to have, like you said, an open mind, to come kind of, like Chelsea said, a blank slate, and to kind of work together to come up with that common goal, that common dream or vision that you all are looking to do. And that's, like you said, past the ag plan, that's any plan or project or any steering group that you do. It's great to have people who aren't just in one silo or in one box, because they're not going to bring too much of a different perspective. So I do agree with you, Maceo, on that.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony. And Chelsea, just to maybe ask you the same, but slightly different, right? Because you like I said, you came into this for the first time. How did you feel from the beginning? Like I said, you came in not really knowing what to expect, and what we ended up with in the end, and the way it's moving forward. Wanted to hear your perspective on how you think that went, and what you consider as sort of this benefit of having both sort of the city officials and your local organizations. You talk about the common market, Soul Spirit, talk about Nature's Candy Farm, all these different entities that are involved in that planning process. What do you think was the benefit that we saw at the end?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I think the benefit for us as growers was seeing that we do mean something to someone else, that we are important, and we do have the support of the city and politicians and the people around us, and that we need to maybe move on from our sense of needing to fight to moving into the sense of, wow, we can now cooperate, which is, I think I said it before, it's a very exciting idea. The knowledge that there is this cooperation happening, and we are being listened to. Because, the groups can be pretty insular. The growers hang out with the growers, and the city folks hang out with the city folks, and you stick with the consumers are the consumers. So bringing all that together really opened my mind also as to things that I need to do to help educate folks as to what we do. I learned a ton about the city. It was just, it was a good process. I learned a ton, and I have a lot more faith now. Let's put it that way. And I do want to echo Tony and Maceo. The open-mindedness is critical, absolutely critical. If I'd have gone in there with, and I'm sure I had some preconceived ideas that I probably don't want to admit, but that open-mindedness was absolutely necessary to the whole process.
Thanks, Chelsea. I think that's an excellent way to at least end my part of the asking questions. Is it comes down with this type of engagement and intentional process, you're building more faith amongst the entities and also building more trust, which is what I think even Marion had mentioned in her presentation. A lot of it comes down to how do you build that trust between the city, your local jurisdiction, and the partners. And once you have that foundation, it goes a long ways, not just when it comes to this one project, but for a lot of future initiatives. So, well, thank you very much, Chelsea, Maceo, Tony, for taking time to speak with us about this. I am gonna open it up for questions if there's any, and I think we're doing okay on time, but Molly, do we have any questions yet?
We do not.
Okay. Well, again, I think we have enough information in there, and we have a link to the project as well that folks can take a look at. And if they have any questions, they know how to get a hold of Maceo and Tony, and I'm sure we can figure out a way to get in touch with Chelsea, and we can share that information. But again, thank you very much. I don't think we have any, we have one more agenda item that we're going to get to in a bit. But again, thank you to our speakers for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's been great.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're going to bring it home now with our presentation from Kelsey. Kelsey?
Yeah, I like it, bringing it home. I think it's a good, good start. Thank you, Sam and Molly, for having me today for our climate snapshot. Again, just to refresh everyone on the call, they have graciously allowed me to come in the last 5 minutes and just give you guys free, low-cost resources to get started on climate work. Climate work is a whole chunk of different things that you can do. So I'm just here to give short little deep dives that are, again, no and low cost to your communities. Today, I'm going to talk about Solar App Plus, and we can hit the next slide. Just to give a context and background for what Solar App Plus is, the U.S. Department of Energy funds multiple different research and development labs. One of those R&D labs is going to be the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. And all of these different R&D labs are tasked with different projects pertaining to their individual subjects. One of their projects at NREL was to develop Solar App Plus, and this is an automatic permitting software for a majority up to 75% of residential solar permits that are going to come through your department. So it saves a lot of time as far as staff time, and it really is going to handle a lot of that front loading. As we see, solar is here to stay. Those permits are only going to increase as costs for panels gets cheaper. So it will really help you guys prepare for that inundation in the coming years and handle that on the front end automatically so that your staff load can pay attention to those more important special projects. However, as an R&D lab, they're not necessarily a marketing and communications group. So while NREL did develop Solar App Plus and is continuing to work with cities and counties to get it smoothly integrated into your permitting processes, they also partner with the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA, on that sort of implementation piece, communication piece, working with you guys one-on-one to get that integrated on the back end. So that's sort of the context of I'll be talking about NREL a lot. I'll mention SIA a few times. So I just want to give you guys that background. We can hit the next slide. I pulled these slides directly from NREL on their great software. Again, this is a software they developed. It will handle up to 75% of the residential solar permits that your permitting department is going to see in the coming years. They did not do this in a silo. They did this with lots and lots of partnerships to ensure that safety codes, building codes, energy codes, everything is incorporated on the front end. It is a very well vetted and well tested software at this point. You can see the cities, counties, different building organizations that they partnered with on the left right there, so that our cities and counties, they can present the software out to us with high confidence that it is a great tool and it is high quality. We can head to the next one. So what is the emphasis? Again, I mentioned a little bit that it's going to handle a lot of the solar permits coming in. The reason being is that at this point in time, there have been hundreds and thousands of residential solar projects installed. So they took over 200,000 residential solar projects, and they realized that the majority of them, approximately 75%, fall into a certain set of parameters. So a standardized set, really. The short answer being that it's one inverter and 1 to 2 solar arrays. There are many more parameters that go into determining what the standardized system is. But that is the short term. And as you can see, they've done some research and plotted the trends going forward on what we can expect to see as far as residential solar permit growth. And it's only going to increase. Again, solar is here to stay. That's all we can expect is more permits and requests for these sorts of systems to be installed on residential lots. You can hit the next one. So what it does is that it's going to take these standardized parameters that they've determined. It is going to ask the permit applicant to fill out a checklist, essentially, put all those parameters in, ask all of those questions on the front end, and then it can automatically determine if that permit is one of those standardized systems that they've seen best practice implemented time and time again with no problems, and they can go ahead and automatically permit that for you. Or if it doesn't fall into those safety parameters and those building parameters that they have set up in Solar App Plus, it will then send it to your permitting staff and say, this is something that you guys actually do need to go out and look at. It's not a common or standardized set of solar on residential. So they do kick it out to you guys. This saves not only time for your staff, but it also saves our local solar economy a lot of time. They don't have to wait for permits for projects. They can get stuff implemented immediately and get that permit fee in. And the permit, again, software is free, no cost to you guys as cities and counties. What happens is the funding comes from the permit applicant. At the time of the permit getting issued, they will pay a fee to the Solar App Plus the software, and that is how it's funded. So you guys can go ahead and go to the next one. This will just walk you through briefly what I just said. Again, it's all on the installer. They come in, they fill out all of these questions, all of these parameters, and then the software itself is able to determine if that is one of those standardized systems we can just go ahead and send off, or if we actually need to kick it out to the jurisdiction to make sure that they get boots on the ground and eyes on the ground looking at these projects. Head to the next one. This is just, again, reiterating everything I've said so far. Just streamlining that permitting process into what you have going on, decreasing time on both your staff as well as the applicant. Head on. Oh, well, this was supposed to progress, but as far as past work goes, if we pay attention to that left box, we did do a webinar in May of this year with NREL themselves and SIA themselves. They went into a lot more detail. Those slides I just pulled are from that presentation directly. You can go ahead and watch it. I believe you can still get the continuing maintenance credits for AICP professionals that were offered then. But those slides, as well as different ways that they have integrated it into city processes and county processes, they did a demonstration walkthrough of the software on that call as well. So please go ahead, watch that. get your AICP credits if they're still available for that, and share it out to your permitting staff, your building staff, your community development staff. Again, solar is here to stay. We have to get up to speed on what this is going to look like for our communities and our city and county processes. On the right side, our present work actually could be present and past work. We've had our community solar ready measure in the Green Communities program since we started the program in 2009. It is one of our more popular measures. 13 of our 20 certified green communities have gotten credit for this measure. This is one way that you can earn points for that measure and get that measure if your community is interested in applying for green communities, because Solar App does streamline. It removes barriers to solar in your community, and that's really what that measure is asking for. So going ahead and incorporating this free software into your processes will get you points for that if you're interested. And then down at the bottom, future work with an asterisk, because we know future work is all potential work. I'm going to start with on the left, Sia. I got an email 2 days ago that the Solar App Manager is going to be in town next month for the Solar and Storage in the Southeast Conference. And he really would very much like to meet with our communities, any building officials, community development officials, permitting officials that have questions about the software, that really want to talk to somebody about it and see how they can incorporate this and answer specific questions to your city and county. He would love to talk to you. So please reach out to me. I will drop my email in the chat. But on top of that, if applying for SolSmart is something you're interested in, which is also a Department of Energy program, they will, adopting Solar App Plus on the front end will, again, just like the Green Communities program, get you several points already towards that certification. And we, especially going forward as renewable energy grows and our energy grid does shift to a cleaner methods, definitely want to try to stay on DOE's good side so that we can be prepared for any additional funding that comes down the line, and just already align ourselves with what they're looking for so that we can position ourselves really well on this green energy transition. And that is all I have. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, if you want to share this with your building officials, if you want to meet with our SIA representative on this, give me a shout. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. And right on time. So thank you, appreciate it. And Kelsey's thrown our email address in there for folks who want to ask her any follow-up questions. And obviously we'll have a follow-up email with some of that information as well that will come from Molly in a little bit. So I think we'll close this meeting out. I hope everyone found the information that we provide helpful today. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is the beginning of our journey to figure out how we do community engagement differently. And I'm really looking forward to working with you all. If in the meantime, if you have any questions around any of this, feel free to reach out to myself or Marian. And if it's program specific, obviously, if it's LTI, you can reach out to Jared Lombard. And if it's CDAP specific, you can reach out to Molly Bogle. Again, wanted to thank everyone who made this happen. Everyone, have a good rest of the week, and we will see you back in a month. Take care, everyone.